This is Michel Wozniak. I'm here in Orlando, Florida, with the co-creator of NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming, Richard Bandler, Dr. Richard Bandler. Hello,
Yes.
Richard.
Hello.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing just great.
Very good, excellent. Richard, I would like you to ask you a few questions to clarify a little bit about NLP, because in France, over there, we know a lot about some NLP, but not really about the real NLP. So, Richard, what is real NLP?
Well, NLP is the study of successful behaviors. When psychology was formed, many, many years ago, it came out of the field of medicine, and they had a tendency, and still do to this day, to look for what's wrong with people and try to understand how it got there as a way of unraveling it and getting people to have better lives. We're not even interested in necessarily people that have problems. Whatever somebody does well, we find out what they're doing and we teach other people to do it. Now, as it turns out, most of this grew out of my trying to model successful psychotherapists. But in the end, it turned out that it was better to model somebody who got over phobias to figure out how to get other people out of phobias. And instead of studying people who had trouble spelling, studying people who could spell to teach people who couldn't spell. And over the years, I've worked with the military, sports people, all kinds of people. And even with the wide range of schizophrenics that I've seen over the years, I try to find out from people who don't have whatever that particular schizophrenic sets of symptoms are. So if somebody can't tell fantasies from reality, I find somebody who can, and use every skill I have, ranging, from hypnosis to flat out intimidation. That's what it takes to create an experience by which somebody learns and builds the foundation to be able to function in the world.
Okay. So how does it work inside? How can NLP actually help people change?
Well, it's really quite simple. If you change the way you think, it changes the way you feel, therefore it changes what you can do. If you try to visualize little tiny letters in your head, they're hard to see, whereas people who spell well make letters this big, and then they're easy to read forward and backwards, and therefore to copy. And there are certain sequences that relate to our neurology of thinking in a certain order. That when people get over a big fear, there's certain things that happen neurologically, and you can induce those by having people think of things in a certain order. Most people have phobic experiences. When you mention anything about spiders, they make a giant picture of spiders. And you have to teach them to take those big pictures and shrink them down suddenly. And eventually you grow a neurocortical pathway, which does that eventually on its own, so it lasts forever. So that whatever that particular fear is, instead of looping around in terror and anticipating terror, people just don't think about it that way. It keeps going, so to speak, and builds a new layer of neurocortical pathway. And the neurocortical pathways, even though there are billions of them in your brain, know how to go to the next one. Because be it ever so microscopic, there's a difference in size. And as neurologists have explained it to me, because when I said, if you have a billion neurocortical pathways, how does even a motor movement work as opposed to just going static? And it's because, be it ever so microscopic, through the billions of cortical pathways, it chemically has a charge which goes by size. When you change that size by either intensifying or de-intensifying it, you get it to go in a different way. It's like in a computer, we describe them as OR gates. Most people don't have choices because they don't have choices. And if you provide more than one neurocortical pathway, people will typically pick the best one, the one that feels the best.
Okay. So actually, do you consider that all the problems that people have in general are connected to internal representations and strategies?
Certainly not.
Okay.
Sometimes the problems are other people.
Okay. Good.
Like governments. Governments seem to be a problem these days. They interfere in all kinds of things. But our responses to what's on the outside are what internal representations are about. I mean, if anybody thinks all your problems are on the inside, they haven't had teenagers. Certainly a lot of our problems are caused by things on the outside. However, our ability to deal with them is based on what's inside us, what we learn and how we think about it. And if what you're doing now isn't working, you have to change the way you're thinking so that you change the way you feel, so you have a greater range of activity, so you can do more things about it.
Okay. So actually, in order to change the way you think, is it important for you to clean up the past?
I don't see any reason for that.
Okay.
That's a big belief.
Mhm.
A lot of psychology is kind of about, I mean, many schools of psychotherapy are forms of archaeological digs in your personal history, because psychology, all the way back to Freud, has this presuppositional belief that if you understand how you developed a problem, poof, mysteriously it will go away. And it's been tried for 100 years. It's a lovely idea, it just doesn't work. And, people who fall in a river and they're afraid of water understand it perfectly and can remember the event vividly, and they still can't go in water. There are people who went and saw Jaws who couldn't swim in their swimming pool. And, it doesn't make any sense, but they know exactly how it got there, and they still can't do it. Understanding doesn't produce change. Changing the way you think and the way you feel produces change. And if you want new behaviors and you want to respond differently to the world, you have to change it at the neurological level, which requires you think differently about it. And not just in terms of content. It's not that you go back and change what happened in your past and lie to yourself that changes it. You have to change the integral structures. When I was a, quote, real scientist, I studied holography. And the smallest change when you're making a hologram, I mean the smallest change, one frequency of light, a micrometer of distance, will mean you get absolutely nothing as opposed to something. Whereas in these nonlinear variables that are so precise. And it taught me that when I was dealing with people, I had to have that level of precision to understand the linear and nonlinear relationships between the size of our images, the brightness of images, the intensity of feelings, whether the feelings are going this way, and understand not just the nervous system, but the antennic nervous system and how the brain is put together and where things are on the motor cortex. That the more you understand the neurological structure of the brain, the more you can understand what you're influencing. And you see, in the 1890s, they didn't know anything about it. So of course, by the time I came along, we were inventing the electron microscope and we were getting deeper. And every year I read more about neurology that tells me more about what's going on. Neurologists have made vast improvements. And of course, there are guys like Noam Chomsky that modeled the way in which language is built and universally all over the planet and represented it in a calculus. We have a calculus that allows us to go, well, if this is the case, we can also figure out what else would be the case. When I modeled Milton, I could not only describe what he did, but I could describe what he would do in other situations because I had a calculus to do it with. And, being a mathematician and approaching these things is very different than coming from a background in psychology where you want to understand things. And, understanding is wonderful, but it doesn't necessarily produce new behaviors. You may understand why you're terrified, but it doesn't make you any less terrified. You may understand why you're not motivated, but it doesn't help you to get a job and get stuff done. And you may understand that, there are good reasons why a lot of the people that I met had, severe mental problems, were stuffed in a mental hospital. And I don't know about you, but the idea of putting all these crazy people in the same place just doesn't seem like a good idea right off the top of my head. And, it's all you could do to be there for 2 hours without going nuts yourself. And some of the things I did were crazier than what the hospital did. But I had to do those kinds of things to get a response from people, to get them back on track and to focus. And it's not enough, to sit and have talking therapies and chit chat, and because it justifies your problem. And when I was started out, I think one of the most common phrases I heard out of psychologists was that you had to learn to accept yourself. And in NLP, we say, no, you don't. You don't have to learn to accept yourself. What you have to learn to do is to evolve yourself. As human beings, everything we do, we learn to do better. Otherwise, they wouldn't give lessons. that people wouldn't take dance lessons and have dance teachers and shooting lessons, and and there wouldn't be masters of karate and people who did things. The object is to get better at stuff. And, whether you're a businessman or a salesman, I mean, we have sales training programs. First sales training program I saw was called Xerox's Selling the Psychological Approach. And, and it made sense because in those days, all you had to do to be a Xerox salesman was answer the phone. They were the only people making copy machines. And, you just picked up the phone and the guy would say, I want 5, and you'd write down the order. But when it came to the point where suddenly now there's a lot of ways to make copies, there's inkjet printers and laser printers, and the technology of xerography isn't even copyrighted anymore. Suddenly you have a company like Xerox, their stock went from 132 to 32 at the speed of light because, they didn't know how to train their people to be competitive. I've worked for banks because banks suddenly became competitive at one time. And they never even knew how to be nice to you, let alone try to get your business. They still are having trouble with it. They answer the phone nicer, but they're not terribly helpful. It's just not in their training. But for companies to succeed and for individuals to succeed, we have to become better at what we do, which means we need to look at the best people that are out there, find out what they're doing, and teach other people to do it, both what they're doing consciously and unconsciously.
And to what extent can NLP be a self-help tool?
To a certain degree. When you start analyzing yourself, then you're using your own model to analyze your model. So there are difficulties with it. There are some techniques that work pretty good by themselves because they've been packaged that way. I've had people that read frogs into princes and sent me letters saying, I'm standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon. I've been in therapy for my fear of heights for years, and for $8.95, I'm now standing on a plexiglass platform over the edge of the Grand Canyon. Thank you very much. And that's because that particular formula works really well. And we have some formulas you can use for self-help. But, that's not really the way I designed it. I designed it as a set of tools to influence another human being. And some of it, you can use reflectively, and some of it's not so good for that. Some of it, you just make yourself nuts.
Mm-hmm. You just wrote a book about education, right?
I just finished a book. It hasn't quite come out. It's going to come out later in the year, I think.
Excellent. This is a topic that I really enjoy and appreciate a lot. What do you think NLP can bring to the education field?
Well, how you teach would be one thing. It's a lot of times teachers get blamed for not doing a good enough job. And the truth is, when teachers go to college, they do not teach them how people learn things. They teach them how to make lesson plans. And then they provide them all this information, and they go, this is a 4th grade word, and everybody has to be able to spell this word and understand this word or read this word. And this is 2nd grade math, and this is 3rd grade math, all of which is ludicrous to start with. They don't install in you the machinery that learns it. And some people have it and some don't. And some have it for some subjects and not others. And what we're trying to do is to give teachers the tools so that they can teach all the kids to spell and put the machine inside their head and then start giving them words. And it won't matter what words they are. When they look at words, they'll go and put them up and make sure they're correct. They'll have a machine inside their head that does it. Math is the same way. Addition is different. And a lot of this stuff, we put in examples of the almost games that kids can play, that the teacher can play with them. And by the time the game is over, the machine is there. So when they go through their lesson plan, it's going to work for more of the people. And if for some reason some of them aren't doing it, you'll be able to pull them out and it'll tell you what to do. And Kate Benson has linked it to a lot of websites because she's been teaching teachers for a long time with this stuff. And she's linked it to websites by which people can get help. And, we're just trying to get in there and help the educational system a little bit. And because, when I learned to spell phonetically, and you can even spell phonetics phonetically in English. I remember when I moved to Ireland, I went up and they had a phone booth and it literally said F-O-N-E. And I thought, how intelligent is that? You know, instead of PH in America, you know, it's always PH with the phone thing. And, you know, that is not terribly phonetic. English has got silent letters in it, and, you know, and long vowels and short vowels, and it's not represented by the visual things. So reading has to be something where you learn the words and know the words, because sounding them out ain't going to really do the trick. You know, I always like to look at teachers and go, sound out the word caught. You know, just doesn't work. But yeah, it's going to be a pretty good book. And I think it's going to be one of the better books about NLP as well, because it really lays out strategies rather than talks about it. You know, some of the books I put out are like self-help books. Get the life you want. You know, you look up your problem, and, you know, I thought of it more as a cake book. I actually was in the kitchen when I decided to do it, and I was looking through a cookbook, and I thought, this is actually a pretty good idea. You know, if you could just look up, you know, okay, I got a phobia, this is what you do. You know, I'm hesitating to do this too much, you know, procrastination here, you know, and I broke it into pieces: get over things, get to things, and get through things. And, but, you know, this really is a little bit more academic, and should be. And we're trying to set a standard for books about education, that they give teachers the tools so that the teachers can teach whatever content they want, you know, and it won't matter if it's Russian or German or French or whatever it is. This is the machinery that learns the materials. Like German. German is actually pretty phonetic. You can almost do German phonetically, but there are a lot of languages you don't stand a chance, you know.
Yes.
So, you know, some teachers will use more of it than others.
Okay. Thank you very much, Richard. This was very interesting to me. I'm sure that many people will just be very interested in that book. I just want to remind you that...
It's going to be called Teaching Learning.
Oh, good. To find a title in French now. Okay, I would like to remind you that if you want more information about real NLP, just go to www.richardbandler.com, or also www.purenlp.com. And if you want information in French, or even trainings, licensed trainings, because it's important to find licensed practitioners and trainers, right?
Correct.
Then you can go to www.optimistra.com. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Richard.
My pleasure.
Have a great day.